Ever wondered how medieval outlaws like Robin Hood survived for years in the wilderness with entire kingdoms hunting them down? While we romanticize forest bandits, the reality was brutal. These weren't heroic adventures, but desperate survival stories. Medieval outlaws developed ingenious techniques to evade capture, find food, and build underground networks that kept them alive when civilization wanted them dead. Forest hideouts. Medieval outlaws transformed England's dense forests into impenetrable fortress networks that could hide entire armies from royal forces. The Cotterell gang used Sherwood forests, natural caves, and thick undergrowth to create hidden camps that housed over 50 men for years without detection. They built concealed shelters using interwoven branches and moss that were completely invisible from just 20 feet away. These forest hideouts included underground storage chambers for weapons and food, secret escape tunnels, and elevated lookout posts that could spot approaching soldiers from miles away. Underground networks. Successful outlaw gangs survived through sophisticated spy networks that rivaled royal intelligence systems, with informants planted in every level of medieval society. The Foulville gang maintained contacts among corrupt sheriffs, sympathetic clergy, and wealthy merchants who provided advance warning of military raids and legal proceedings against them. Village priests would secretly shelter outlaws during them, while manor lords offered safe passage through their lands in exchange for protection services. These underground networks extended across multiple counties, creating communication chains that could relay messages hundreds of miles within days. Some outlaws even had allies within royal courts who leaked sensitive information about planned operations. Survival hunting. Medieval outlaws became master poachers who could feed large groups using illegal hunting techniques that required extraordinary skill and stealth to avoid death sentences. They developed silent killing methods using crossbows with muffled strings, set elaborate trap systems that could capture deer without alerting forest wardens, and learned to hunt at night when royal guards were least active. Outlaw hunters understood animal behavior so completely they could predict migration patterns and feeding times to maximize their illegal harvests. The most skilled could kill, butcher, and transport a full deer in under an hour, leaving no evidence behind. They also mastered fishing with hidden nets, trapping rabbits with sophisticated snare systems, and capturing birds using techniques passed down through generations of poachers who faced execution if caught. Disguise. Mastery. Medieval outlaws perfected the art of disguise to move freely through towns and villages where bounties on their heads could buy entire farms. They maintained multiple false identities, complete with forged papers, learned to speak in different regional dialects, and could convincingly pose as traveling merchants, pilgrims, or wandering monks, depending on the situation. The most successful outlaws studied the mannerisms and customs of different social classes so thoroughly they could fool even trained investigators. Some gangs included members who were skilled actors, and seamstresses who created authentic-looking costumes and religious vestments for infiltration missions. Outlaws would often spend months establishing false identities in towns before executing major heists, building relationships with locals who would unknowingly provide alibis. The best disguise masters could walk through market squares where their wanted posters were displayed without anyone recognizing them, even conducting business with the same officials who were hunting them. Code systems. Outlaw gangs developed complex coded communication systems that allowed them to coordinate operations across vast territories without alerting authorities to their plans. They used seemingly innocent market songs that contained hidden messages about troop movements, carved symbols on trees that indicated safe routes and dangerous areas, and employed merchants who unknowingly carried coded letters disguised as routine business correspondence. The Cotterell gang used a numerical system based on local church bells, where different ringing patterns conveyed specific tactical information to scattered gang members. Some groups developed hand signal languages that could communicate detailed raid plans during daylight hours when verbal communication was too dangerous. Religious imagery was frequently used in codes since biblical references appeared innocent to anyone intercepting messages. The most sophisticated outlaw networks maintained codebooks that required multiple keys to decipher, ensuring that captured members could only reveal limited information under torture. These communication systems were so effective that some Gangs coordinated simultaneous attacks on targets hundreds of miles apart with perfect timing. Resource raids. Medieval outlaws perfected strategic raiding techniques that maximized profits while minimizing risks, targeting specific resources that were essential for long-term survival rather than random acts of highway robbery. They conducted detailed reconnaissance missions to identify the most vulnerable targets, studying guard routines, transportation schedules, and the defensive capabilities of potential victims before launching carefully coordinated attacks. Market. Day raids were particularly effective because outlaws could strike while most townspeople were gathered in public squares, allowing them to loot undefended homes and flee before organized resistance could form. The Cotero gang specialized in attacking during religious festivals when wealthy pilgrims traveled with valuable offerings, often coordinating multiple simultaneous raids across different counties to overwhelm law enforcement response capabilities. Outlaws also targeted tax collectors who carried large amounts of royal currency, salt merchants whose goods were worth more than gold, and wool traders who transported the most valuable commodity in medieval England. Winter raids focused on food storage facilities, grain stores, and livestock herds that could sustain gangs through harsh months when foraging became impossible. The most successful outlaw groups operated like military units with specialized role scouts, archers, horsemen, and foot soldiers who could execute complex multi-phase raids that left authorities confused about the gang's actual size and capabilities. These resource raids were often timed to coincide with political upheavals when royal forces were distracted by larger conflicts. Ally recruitment. Medieval outlaws survived by constantly expanding their networks through strategic recruitment of allies from every level of society, creating support systems that made them nearly impossible to eliminate completely. They specifically targeted displaced soldiers returning from unsuccessful wars who possessed military skills but lacked legitimate employment opportunities, offering them immediate income and camaraderie in exchange for their combat expertise. Outlaws also recruited from among the dispossessed peasants who had lost their lands to corrupt officials, merchants ruined by excessive taxation, and skilled craftsmen who had been driven out of guild-controlled towns. The recruitment process was sophisticated and careful, with potential allies being observed and tested for months before being trusted with sensitive information. About gang operations and hideout locations. Some gangs operated like medieval employment agencies, offering different levels of involvement, from occasional informants who received small payments for tips to full-time members who shared in all profits and risks. Religious outcasts, including defrocked priests and monks who had fled their orders, were particularly valuable recruits because they could read, write, and move freely through religious communities that might harbor the gang. Women were recruited as spies, messengers, and operators of safe houses, since they attracted less suspicion from authorities and could access information through domestic networks that were invisible to male law enforcement. The most successful outlaw leaders understood that recruitment was as much about providing hope and belonging as it was about criminal opportunity, creating gang cultures that functioned like alternative families for people who had been abandoned by legitimate society. Whether survival. Medieval outlaws faced the constant challenge of surviving harsh weather conditions without proper shelter or reliable food sources, developing techniques that enabled them to endure winters that killed even well-equipped travelers. They learned to construct sophisticated wilderness shelters using only materials found in forests, building liento structures lined with moss and pine needles that could retain body heat even during severe storms. Fire management became a critical survival skill since smoke could reveal their locations to pursuing soldiers. So outlaws developed techniques for building smokeless fires, using specific types of dry wood and carefully controlled ventilation. Winter food storage required ingenious solutions, since traditional preservation methods required equipment and facilities that outlaws couldn't access, leading them to develop techniques for smoking meat in hidden underground chambers and preserving food in tree caches that were protected from both weather and wildlife. Clothing presented constant challenges, since outlaws couldn't simply purchase new garments when their clothes wore out, forcing them to become skilled at repairing leather and fabric using materials scavenged from raids or traded with sympathetic villagers. The most resourceful outlaws learned to manufacture their own winter gear from animal pelts. using techniques passed down by hunters and trappers who understood how to create clothing that could protect against hypothermia and frostbite. Weather prediction became essential for planning raids and avoiding detection, with experienced outlaws developing the ability to read atmospheric conditions and animal behavior to anticipate storms that could provide cover for their movements or trap them in exposed positions. Some gangs maintained seasonal bases that provided better protection during the worst weather, rotating between summer camps that prioritized concealment and winter shelters that emphasized warmth and resource storage. Medical knowledge. Medieval outlaws developed impressive medical expertise out of necessity, since seeking help from trained physicians would expose them to capture and execution by authorities who monitored all medical practitioners. They became skilled at treating sword wounds, arrow injuries, and broken bones using techniques learned from battlefield medics, displaced army surgeons, and folk healers who were sympathetic to their cause. Herbal medicine became essential knowledge for outlaw gangs, since forest environments provided access to plants that could treat infections, reduce fever, and manage pain without requiring expensive imported medicines available only to the wealthy. The most medically knowledgeable outlaws could perform basic surgery, including removing arrowheads, setting broken bones, and stitching wounds using tools improvised from stolen surgical instruments or crafted from available materials. Of poisons was equally important, since outlaws needed to identify safe plants for food and medicine while also understanding which substances could be used as weapons against their enemies. Some gangs included former monks or clergy who had received medical training in monastery hospitals and could provide advanced care that significantly improved the gang's survival rates during violent encounters. Pain management became a specialized skill, since wounded outlaws couldn't afford to be incapacitated for long periods, when every member's contribution was essential for group survival. Mental health treatment was equally important, as outlaws faced constant stress, trauma, and the psychological toll of living outside society's protection, leading to the development of techniques for maintaining group morale and individual resilience. The most successful outlaw gangs maintained medical supply caches hidden near their major hideouts, stockpiling bandages, antiseptic herbs, and surgical tools acquired through raids on wealthy households and religious institutions that served as medieval hospitals. Escape routes. Medieval outlaws engineered elaborate escape route systems that could enable entire gangs to vanish within minutes when discovered by law enforcement, using detailed knowledge of local geography to create networks of hidden paths that were invisible to pursuing soldiers. They memorized every stream, ravine, cave, and dense thicket within their territories, creating mental maps that included multiple backup routes for every possible scenario, from their hideouts to safe houses and supply caches. Underground passages were constructed where possible, with gangs digging tunnels that connected their main camps to nearby forests or riverbanks, where boats could be hidden for water escapes that left no tracks for trackers to follow. Tree-based escape routes used rope and wooden platform systems that allowed outlaws to travel through forest canopies without touching the ground, making pursuit extremely difficult for mounted soldiers who couldn't follow aerial paths. Night escape techniques were particularly sophisticated, since darkness provided cover, but also increased the risk of becoming lost or injured during hasty retreats from discovered hideouts. Some gangs maintained networks of relay stations, where fresh horses, supplies, and additional weapons were cached at strategic points along escape routes, enabling them to sustain long-distance flights from pursuing forces. Decoy techniques were employed to confuse trackers, with false trails created to lead soldiers away from the gang's actual escape route, while the outlaws fled in completely different directions. Water-based escapes were preferred when available, since streams could hide tracks and scent trails that tracker dogs used to pursue fugitives, with some gangs becoming skilled at underwater movement and breath control, techniques that allowed them to hide submerged in rivers and ponds. The most elaborate escape plans included contingencies for different seasons, weather conditions, and types of pursuing forces, with gang members regularly practicing escape drills to ensure perfect coordination during actual emergencies. Panic could lead to capture and execution. These medieval outlaws weren't just running from the law, they were building parallel societies that operated completely outside royal control, using survival skills that would challenge modern special forces. While we rely on technology and infrastructure, They created self-sufficient communities in hostile wilderness using nothing but intelligence, cooperation, and ruthless pragmatism. The most shocking part, many of their survival techniques and underground network strategies are still used by resistance fighters and survival experts today. You could start implementing medieval outlaw food procurement, shelter building, and information gathering methods immediately in wilderness survival situations. Modern survivalists studying these methods report they're more effective and sustainable than expensive survival gear. Want to master these medieval outlaw survival secrets that kept people alive against impossible odds? Subscribe for our complete guide to medieval survival strategies that actually work when you're completely cut off from civilization. Don't let modern dependence leave you helpless when centuries of proven outlaws' wisdom is waiting to transform your survival capabilities forever.